Have you ever been shopping for a new car in South Africa and felt like something's just not right with these prices? Like you're getting less bang for your buck than you should?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. It's a feeling a lot of us get here when looking at new car prices. And there's actually a hidden reason behind it, a big one that's been flying under the radar for a while now. It has to do with a really outdated tax formula that is pushing the price of cars, especially imported ones, way up.
Okay, so let's dig into this. What's the source material we're looking at for this deep dive?
We've got this really insightful article from MyBroadband published just last week on March 19th, 2025. It really breaks down the nitty-gritty of this whole situation.
Awesome. So our mission for today is to understand this decades-old tax called the ad valorem duty, which I'll admit I hadn't even heard of before reading this My Broadband piece, and we'll try to figure out how it's impacting the price you see on that sticker in the showroom.
Absolutely. Let's get into it.
So to kick things off, what's the core issue here? What's the big problem with this ad valorem duty?
The root of the problem is that South Africa hasn't changed the way it calculates the ad valorem duty on imported cars in over 3 decades. Like, we're talking 31 years. The formula we're using today is the same one they were using back in 1994.
1994, that's like ancient history when it comes to cars and technology and pretty much everything else. So what was the original intent of this ad valorem duty? Why was it put in place in the first place?
Well, the general idea behind ad valorem taxes is that they're designed to target luxury goods. The thinking is that if you could afford a high-end product, you could afford to pay a bit more in taxes on it.
Okay. That makes sense, I guess. But how exactly does this apply to cars? How do they actually calculate this ad valorem duty? Is there some secret formula?
There is a formula.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bit mathy, but the My Broadband article lays it out pretty clearly. It says the percentage of the tax is equal to 0.000003 multiplied by the retail value of the car minus 20%. And then you subtract 0.75 from that whole thing. And there's a cap on the tax, too. It can't go higher than 30%.
Right. That sounds kind of complicated. Can we maybe break that down with some real-world examples? Like, how much would this tax actually add to the price of a car?
Yeah, definitely. So let's say you've got a car that has a retail value of R100,000 in the country where it was manufactured. Using that formula, the ad valorem tax would work out to 1.65%, which would come out to an actual tax of R1,650.
R1,650. So not a crazy amount in the grand scheme of things, but still, it's an extra cost. Now, what if we bump up the price a bit? Let's say we're looking at a car with an original value of R200,000.
This is where things get really interesting because the ad valorem tax in this case jumps to 4.05%. So the tax bill goes up to R8,100.
Wow. So the price of the car only doubled, but the tax went up almost 5 times higher. You can really see how this formula starts to have a bigger and bigger impact as the value of the car goes up.
Exactly. And this is why that 31-year gap since the last update to the formula is such a big deal. Because think about how much inflation has happened over that time and how much the rand has weakened. Back in 1994, R200,000 got you a genuinely luxurious car.
Yeah, you're talking top-of-the-line stuff for that kind of money back then. But what about today? What does R200,000 get you in the current car market?
Well, the My Broadband article points out that these days R200,000 often puts you in the range of basic entry-level models from brands like Suzuki, Toyota, Renault. They specifically mentioned the Suzuki Espresso, which sells for somewhere between R178,900 and R219,900. These aren't exactly luxury vehicles, but they're being hit with a tax that was designed for luxury cars from 3 decades ago.
It's wild how this formula just hasn't kept up with the times. And the article also talks about how this affects another big part of the market these days, electric vehicles or EVs.
Yeah, that's a huge point because imported EVs generally have a higher starting price tag than traditional petrol or diesel cars. This outdated ad valorem duty adds a whole other layer of cost on top of that, which could make EVs even less accessible to South African buyers who are trying to make the switch to more eco-friendly vehicles.
Right, EVs are already expensive enough. And the My Broadband article actually includes a table that shows how this ad valorem duty works out for cars at different price points. What are some of the examples from that table that really stand out to you?
If you look at the table, a car with an original value of R300,000 would get hit with an ad valorem tax of R19,350, which is 6.45%. But then if you jump up to a car with an original value of R600,000, the tax jumps all the way to R81,900 at a rate of 13.65%. It really shows how this tax becomes a bigger and bigger part of the overall price as the value of the car goes up.
So looking at all this, the argument for changing the formula to be more up-to-date seems pretty strong. It doesn't seem fair that a basic car should be taxed the same way as a high-end luxury car from a completely different economic era.
Totally. And there's a lot of support for revising the formula to better reflect what we consider luxury in today's market and to take into account the realities of the current economic landscape. This could potentially make a wider range of imported cars much more affordable for South African consumers.
Right. But as with most things, there are two sides to every story. The MyBroadband article also mentions some of the potential downsides to adjusting this tax. What are some of the concerns?
The main worry is that changing this tax could have a negative impact on South Africa's local car manufacturing industry, which is already facing tough competition from imported vehicles.
And we have seen more and more imported cars on the roads, haven't we?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The My Broadband article highlights the increasing competition coming from India and China. In 2024, South Africa imported a whopping 157,326 vehicles from India and over 39,000 from China. Combined, these imports represented a massive 38% of all new car sales in the country.
Wow, 38%. That's a huge chunk of the market. So what's making these imports so competitive, even with the import duties that are already in place?
Well, there are a few reasons. One big factor is that both India and China benefit from large-scale production and much lower labor costs than we have here. They can just produce cars more cheaply. And the article also points out that Chinese manufacturers often receive significant support from their government, which helps them offer even more competitive prices on the global market.
Right. So they've got some built-in advantages there, and it sounds like local car manufacturers are really feeling the heat from this competition.
Yeah, they are. The My Broadband article mentions that local manufacturers have been speaking out more and more about how expensive it is to do business in South Africa. This makes it really hard for them to compete on price with all these affordable imports that are flooding the market.
And it's important to remember that this ad valorem duty isn't the only tax that gets added to the price of an imported car. It's like a tax on top of a tax.
Absolutely. The ad valorem duty is applied in addition to the existing 25% import duty on cars that come from countries outside of Europe and the UK. So the total tax burden on many imported cars ends up being pretty substantial.
So it's a really complicated situation with valid points on both sides. You've got the need to make cars more affordable for people and the need to support our local manufacturing industry.
Exactly. And as the My Broadband article points out, we're not trying to take sides on whether or not the tax should be changed. The goal of this deep dive is to help understand how this decades-old ad valorem duty currently works and to present the information as it's laid out in the article.
Right. So to wrap things up, the key takeaway here is that South Africa's ad valorem tax formula for imported vehicles hasn't been updated in 31 years. That means a tax that was originally designed to target luxury items is now having a big impact on the price of even basic imported cars. That's mostly because of inflation and the weakening of the rand over those 31 years.
Yes. And this has all sorts of consequences. It could make a wide range of cars, including newer and greener options like EVs, less affordable for South Africans.
It really makes you think about the bigger picture. How would changing or keeping this tax affect the types of cars that are available to us and what we end up paying for them? And how does all of this tie into the overall cost of living in South Africa?
It really raises a fundamental question about striking the right balance between making goods affordable for consumers and supporting and protecting domestic industries. As South Africa continues to navigate these complicated economic issues, the future of this decades-old tax and how it affects the automotive landscape is something we should all be paying attention to.